Rashid Johnson in the exhibition which opened last night, Rumble, which runs through the 25th of February. Rashid Johnson is here in conversation with Rodrigues Widholm, Joao Ribas, Mary Ceruti, and Benjamin Godsill. Rashid Johnson was born in 1977 and raised in Chicago, where he attended Columbia College for a degree in photography, undergraduate, and then grad school at the School of the Art Institute of Chicago.
Where I did not graduate.
Where he did not. Not true.
Yes.
Julia Rodrigues Widholm is an associate curator at the Museum of Contemporary Art Chicago and is organizing Rashid's forthcoming survey exhibition there, covering a decade of work, opening in April of this year. Joao Ribas is the curator of the List Visual Arts Center at MIT in Cambridge and the former curator of the Drawing Center here in New York. He will include Rashid's work in a group exhibition opening at the List this October. The show will include work from the late 19th century to the present day and focuses on the notion of art as speculative thought. Mary Ceruti is the director and chief curator at the Sculpture Center in Long Island City and organizes Rashid's solo exhibition at the Sculpture Center in 2009. And Benjamin Godsill is an independent curator based in New York and former curator of the New Museum. And in 2010, Ben and Rashid had a conversation that was published in Moose magazine. So thank you all for participating this evening in honor of this exhibition. And I thought to start the conversation, I would love to hear a little bit about the title of the exhibition, Rumble, and where it comes from and how you find it is involved in all these different works that we're looking at tonight.
I wanted to start by asking, who are these seats reserved for? Who is more VIP than these seats right here? Those are just for you, hope I will. That's interesting. That would be really close. That'd be awkward. The title of the show, Rumble, really came from a conversation that I had with Mark Peo while I was starting to think about what to do for the show, and he informed me that Don King once lived in this building. And I was pretty amazed by that. I've been a boxing fan my entire life. My father was a boxing fan, so I kind of grew up in it. I never fought because I'm too pretty. But I've always been really kind of interested in that. And King in particular is a fascinating character for me, because when I was first kind of introduced to him, and he would go through his like rants and the kind of the pageantry of like saying only in America and this kind of patriotism. As a younger person, when I was say maybe 8 or 9 years old, I took it to be fairly a sincere gesture. And I didn't know any other black people who really thought it was amazing to live in America at that time. And I'd never been exposed to that kind of patriotism. Obviously, now I think I kind of reconsidered my original position around his sincerity, but the title then comes from a fight that he promoted, which was called Rumble in the Jungle in Zaire. I became very interested. Am I going too far, too quick?
No.
I became interested in the time span in which kind of King kind of affected people's lives. And you think about his relationship to Ali, you then think about his relationship to Zaire, and you think about Mobutu Sese Seko, one of like the most problematic post-colonial African dictators, and you think about Don King and Mobutu Sese Seko in a room like negotiating something is fascinating to me. And then, to more kind of contemporary conversation, you think about his relationship to Mike Tyson and kind of the tragic character that Tyson became. So you think about this time span of, the 60s to really the present, and this boxing promoter's kind of relationship to it all. And I think that helped me start to think about what to make for this show.
And how does that reflect in the work?
That's a really interesting question. I think oftentimes I'll take an idea or consider an idea, and it not only reflects literally in how you can translate through the narrative of the work. But my actual approach to making it, I think, is effective. And I think that's as valuable for me as some sort of kind of legible kind of symbolism that you could then decode. Because I'm not, as much decoding as I ask people to do in my work, which I think is probably a considerable amount, and I apologize for that. I don't feel that it's completely necessary in every aspect of how I approach it. So, you know.
One thing that stands out for me when you talk about this kind of the history of the space and the history of place and kind of peeling back those layers and then integrating it into your thought about how you approach making an exhibition is something that I see in a lot of the work. You call it decoding, but I'm not talking about necessarily the materiality of the work. A lot of the elements you employ, for me, it's always about what they are and what they appear to be, but oftentimes what history lies beneath them, and oftentimes there's a secret of history that lies beneath them, which we see in a lot of work, what it is and then what it means, but more beyond that, this notion of hiding oneself and putting on a false front for the world, which you think of when you think of Don King as kind of what we now perhaps see in our age, this faux kind of patriotism and this kind of cloaking, perhaps other things that are going on. Often in the work, this notion of secret societies, or symbolism, I'm staring across these amazing target symbols, and then the palm trees, which are themselves a stand-in for other things. And for me, I've always found it interesting the way that you employ secrets, both secret societies and also kind of inside jokes and inside things. So if you're wondering, just in the work, what I see, is that true? Like, what are important secrets to you when you're making a thing? What's an important secret in your practice?
Those are secrets.
I really did ask
You set yourself up for that one.
let me ask the question in a different way. When I look at something and I think about a secret, I think of trying to hide oneself, but also trying to fake people out. So I'm wondering, what are you trying to catch our eye with that maybe is the thing? What am I getting faked out by? What am I getting drawn to that isn't really there?
Well, you know, I'll take that as an opportunity to maybe, you know, talk about the idea of authoring an artwork, and I think it's really important. I think not only, I guess I'm not going to make this generational because I don't think that's fair, but okay, I'm going to make this generational because I think that's the only way that I can explain that. Is that when you have a generation like mine, give 5 years, take away 5 years, that has become really just so much more informed about art through an art historical lens, not exclusively through, you know, a discourse with other practitioners or with kind of having just found yourself making art from a less informed place. You have to then negotiate your familiarity with art history. And I think through that negotiation, you're trying to navigate formal things, which, you know, are very important to me, but then not lose that kind of cloaked, authored experience of an artwork that personalizes that artwork. And I think maybe some of the coding is my narcissism and wanting the viewer to then participate in a way where there is this, I think you said something about like layers, where there's this opportunity to kind of confront an artwork both as a successfully formal object, and then within multiple reads, then kind of feel this this need to then kind of continue to peel back at that artwork, and it starts to unveil itself, I guess, in some ways. And I think that's always really been my goal, is to create maybe some aha moments for people as they continue to participate with it, and in a sense maybe reward people who then continue to kind of successfully participate with the work. it's like when you find out what a joke is, and you're like, you're excited that you're in on it, kind of scenario. I think that that's kind of what I've done in several different works and throughout my body of work. Something.
And I think yours is sort of a research-based practice in some way, and you obviously put a lot of work into what you make, and you have an expectation of the viewer to also put a certain amount of work into their engagement with the piece. And I think that's fair. I mean, I think there is a reward, as you say, in the viewer really digging deeply into the different layers of the work and the kind of the sequence of the work. Or
I mean, I think we see that a lot, though, in contemporary artist practice. For me, it's more interesting not just the notion of layers and discovery and that sort of secret, the notion of employing the fact that we all know there's a secret there and it can't be decoded, and it's something that's almost understandable. For me, that's what I was trying to get at in my ineloquent question a little bit. So I'm wondering how that important is this notion that we've made an agreement, a pact, that we can't get to the bottom of it, but we're going to find some middle ground and some form of engagement in between those two polarities of knowledge and unknowledge or disknowledge.
It also strikes me though that it's like, to use a really old-fashioned phrase, it's like the personal is the political, so that there are personal, there are elements that come from your personal history and your personal identity, some of which we share and some of which we don't,
Right.
Depending on who we are. And I think, some of them are real flashpoints for a cultural moment that a lot of people can connect with in that way. But then there are other ways in which they have meaning for you that they don't have, other people aren't going to get. So it's like, I don't read it as so much about like trying to keep the secret, as much as letting things slide. Like what I really like about the title of the show is that I think Rumble has that. It's kind of aggressive. It's like I want to make trouble, but it's kind of in a playful way. Like rumbles aren't riots.
Right.
Like, rumbles are like a staged moment. Like we're going to have a fight.
And no one goes to the hospital from a rumble.
West Side Story.
Like he got in a rumble and he's in the hospital.
West Side Story or like Monday Night Football, like all like those are rumble. The Rumble in the Jungle. Like rumble is this kind of, it's a playful kind of confrontation.
Right.
And I think I think it's a brilliant title for that reason. Obviously it plays into the work in other ways, that flashpoint of history. But I think I like the way the title sort of reflects the way you work, because there is that playful side to this work. As serious it is about identity and about art history and all of those things, it's also playful and enjoyable. And
I would say, I think I texted this to somebody, Rashid, there's a roughness, there's a violence, as the name Rumble implies, I think, throughout all the work, but there's an elegance to that violence, this composed quality. I mean, for me, I see it just looking around me everywhere, but I think it really, it comes to a head for me in the video, Black Yoga Upstairs, where there's an elegance, it's beautiful, gorgeously shot, and people moving beautifully, but there's a certain sense of aggression and of violence to all the movements that take place, and even to the landscape a little bit, which then is personified in just behind us in this, crash work. It's like a gorgeous, elegant vessel being the mirror that you then kind of bound to run up against. And I think that notion of rumble from the title is kind of played out throughout, whether acknowledged or not.
I'm interested in the physicality of the performance of the gesture, and how that is something that is, I think, reflected throughout the work, from the video to this piece, to that. So I'd like to hear you talk a little bit more about that physicality and that kind of performance of, the mark making and the gesture and the drip and the dancers in your video.
Well, most of the works that I make are made on the floor. So most of the gesturing takes place on the ground, which gives me kind of this leverage, I think, to almost really kind of aggressively move kind of quickly towards it with gravity as an assistant. But I always kind of explain it in what maybe kind of a strange way. When I was young, I was really interested in breakdancing. And when you would go out to breakdance, you kind of then create a circle. It's never a square. I always wondered why it was not a square, you know. But you create a circle, and then you essentially walk around that circle to create the boundaries for the place that you're then going to perform inside. And so you kind of walk around and you create this boundary, and you create this boundary, and then you step inside of it, have this kind of arena, this boundary that you've created, and then you kind of perform your moves inside of that. It's not dissimilar from my approach to most of these works and most of the works I've made, honestly, over the last few years, is that I walk around them and I gesture from above. I walk around them continuously and then I enter them. And I guess does that kind of help?
I think this show, for me, in a lot of ways, suggests a move away from the found object toward a confidence in your hand. And I think that's significant.
I shared that with you privately. But now that you all know, yes, I think that I've started to trust my marking strategy and the way that I would like to approach a work, and trust my hand more. And I think for me, it's something that you see quite a bit more in the work from some of the earlier poured works that I don't know who's familiar with, but some of the earlier poured works, I think there was really this kind of interest in like topography and this interest in just kind of letting be the material. And I didn't want to be a painter. I was determined to not be a painter. You know, I don't like painters. They're pretentious. I'm joking.
Except that you want to be a painter.
I have several painters friends. Some of my best friends are painters. But I was determined to let the materials kind of function, and that my relationship to it was going to be almost exclusively a conceptual one. I was going to inhabit the works with my ideas, and that every other aspect of it was just a way to kind of establish how I was going to create this facilitator for my concept and ideas. What happened is I became a romantic in the middle of the process, and I started to love making art. I started to really enjoy making art, which is different. I mean, we live in a time where there are people who do not enjoy making art, and that's really not what they do. It just happens to be what I do, is not only kind of contribute my ideas to the works, but I'm very invested in the making of an artwork, and that's been something that I've been learning to kind of deal with over, I think, the last. I'm being really honest with you guys right now. I can't believe I'm saying this shit.
Rashid, I think there's an interesting sort of rhetorical thing that's being enacted, even in our conversation, which I find fascinating, is this talk about interiority, exteriority, legibility, secrets. And, for example, you used the word breakdancing, which is a journal. You know, there's an ongoing debate that's about 30 years old about breakdancing versus b-boying.
Right.
So breakdancing is a journalistic term that was used by the press to refer to this practice that was known in the community as b-boying. So if you use the word breakdancing among the b-boying community, you are positioning yourself as someone outside. Right? Same way, just the way we use language, we talk about the physicality of the work. This language. For me, what's fascinating is that the secret is that there is no secret. Or rather, that the thing that we think we know is unknowable. That the thing we think is there, that we recognize that may be a secret that we're not let in on, is actually not sustained by anything. And that there is nothing there beyond the thing you're looking at. And for me, what that speaks to is something that I think is deeply rooted and actually incredibly radical outside of connotations of violence or physicality. It has nothing to do with art, rather. But it has to do with the nature of how objects function and what is called an ontology of objects. What I always found fascinating about your work, and I think it's in this show, probably the more explicit way, is how we think of blackness as identity, we think of it as a kind of social concept, a historical, racial concept, but we don't tend to think of it as a metaphysical concept. And what that means is that there is a sense of that, and I'm not the first person to say this, people like Fred Moten have made great arguments about this, but there is a kind of epistemology, a kind of knowledge that blackness represents that's ontologically different from the position of being a black artist or blackness as a kind of embodied subjectivity. And that what that means is that there are signifiers and objects and codes and ways of approaching the world which imply a certain kind of knowledge or a certain kind of metaphysics, which is historically excluded. So when you talk about art, Kant is the genesis, the source of our thinking about art. Kant very much said that basically, metaphysically, blackness equates with lack of knowledge. So I think when we talk about things like black yoga, shea butter, negrosis, when we talk about the material that you're using and these gestures, I think we have to be careful about this idea that there's kind of a secret we're not let in on, or a kind of process that is there but hinted at. And it's actually, I think, the idea that the secret is that there is no secret. And in fact, it can be radically unknowable.
Right.
And there's, I think what's interesting is the way that you toy with that, for example, in a kind of metaphysics. We have examples in the show from P-Funk mythology, which are really brought out in the Cosmic Slot piece, which, by the way, has nothing to do with outer space. It's actually a story about a woman who is living in poverty, trying to raise a child, and becomes a prostitute, and tries to hide both the poverty and her prostitution to her child. It's very much grounded in the experience, black experience in urbanity. So I want to foreground that the materiality of the work itself is playing with ideas of knowledge and an idea of the ontology of blackness, which has nothing to do with the way we traditionally talk about race. And I think that's actually a profoundly radical aspect about your work. And I won't be too long-winded unless we want to explore that a little further. So as we talk about secrets and this, I think it's good to point out that the secret is that there is no secret.
I do not disagree at all.
Which is why he couldn't tell you that.
Well, I mean, there's, the ground for this is kind of, well, the ground of this is, I was reading on the train. I have a very long train right here. So I was reading on the train, and I happened to read this passage in French Fanon, where he talks about how he came into the world with all the willfulness of wanting to experience the world in its fullness, and he discovered that he wanted to learn about things, and he discovered that he was an object among other objects.
Wretched of the earth.
Yeah, and so that his relationship to things in the world was as an object, not as a subject.
Right.
Yeah.
That he wasn't himself part of an ontology. An ontology is the study of things or the study of objects. So he was already part of someone else's understanding of what an object was.
Right.
Right. And so we talk about yoga as a kind of practice, as a kind of knowledge, right? It's an esoteric knowledge of the East. Mm-hmm. And of course, black yoga, in a sense, is kind of an oxymoron. In a way, right? Because it speaks to this idea that there is a kind of there are other forms of knowledge which can be radically unknowable,
right?
Or in a sense not accessible to everyone.
Are completely fictional.
And so that's in a sense what I'm trying to foreground. And I think there's also a radical project about a history of what I would call black metaphysics, which I think is really important to point out and to kind of raise as an issue. And the materiality of the work, I think, has that in it.
Where should we go from here?
Well, I think maybe we're talking about at what point. I mean, I've had a lot of conversations about your work with you and other people, and thinking about it and positioning it within art history, which I see it as really coming from the 19th century, not a particularly contemporary phenomenon, but to maybe talk about the point where this ontology, this relationship to objects, this metaphysics, to what extent can it become fetishized? To the extent that the materials that you use become fetishistic.
I think in some ways I'm employing them almost as fetish materials. I mean, I think that's partially their intention. I think the bigger question is, what is my actual relationship to them?
Yeah.
And do I have a closer relationship or a more informed relationship than the audience as they imagine me to have?
Right. So the secret. Right.
So essentially, for instance, shea butter.
Yeah.
This is just something that I found to use, and I think it represents, in some ways, this kind of this opportunity from a different time. Black people trying to address their relationship to an Africanness, and then that application of that product then becomes this attempt at an application of an Africanness onto their physical selves.
Right.
My relationship to this material is no stronger than yours could potentially be.
Right.
In that I never opened a shea nut and produced shea butter. I have no tribal or spiritual relationship to the material. But I think that I played with this several times, I think, in my work, and I think it started fairly early, is that I made a series of photographs when I was a student that were portraits of homeless men.
Yeah.
There were black homeless men that were in the neighborhood where I was going to school. I made these to have a conversation about how problematic my being a middle class male raised in mostly in the Chicago suburb, how problematic it would be for me to then point my lens in what is, obviously there's a rich tradition and history of people of privilege pointing their lenses or their brushes towards people in different conditions. The interesting thing that then happened was that it was never addressed, my class difference from these people. Exclusively what was addressed was how we were both...
Some solidarity of some...
Right. As if we had the same experience. Right. As if we were living in the same condition. I learned a very valuable lesson from that. And I think that it's really informed everything that I've made after, is that there's going to be a perception as to how I can navigate both materials and art as a whole. And there's going to be an expectation to some degree for how I would then approach that and how I would deal with that. And I think the thing that I then tried to do was not take blackness as a subject, but consider that it was going to be addressed as a subject of the work. Taking that into consideration made me realize that I needed to take ownership of how I wanted that to be perceived and how I wanted that to be dealt with as I kind of negotiate how other people were going to deal with the work. Right. So I said, I will give you this in return for you then participating with my work and taking the time to take it seriously, to address what my formal concerns are, and what some other concerns outside of my ideological concerns.
But there's been often a tortured relationship both internally and externally. Internally on the part of the artist, externally in terms of culturally speaking, about certain formal ability to use certain formal devices for formal decisions historically. So, for example, you take Anthony Braxton, who always had a contentious relationship in the history of jazz because he was using mathematical compositional.
Right, the hate practice.
Yeah, because he was using, he was composing like a white composer. He wasn't an improviser.
Yeah, it wasn't improvisation.
So
it wasn't jazz.
Yeah, and so he couldn't use devices that were in a sense legitimate formal devices in the history of classical music. Right. And and on the album covers he's always depicted with like a cardigan and a pipe. Right. Not like
well, I mean, Monk is formally trained, but I mean, they did everything in their power to downplay that. Right.
So, do you feel like, in a sense, that's a generational situation, and that you feel like your ability to take certain, we were talking about your ease of familiarity with certain art historical devices, your own comfort level with a certain expressive gestural mark making, and obviously affinities that you might have with contemporary artists for whom their identity is not part of it. Is not their subject, or they're not subjected to their identity. We can talk about many artists from Los Angeles in particular. do you feel like you navigate that as well, and your sort of ability to use different formal devices in a way that doesn't become codified as your analogous to your decision to use something like Sheba? To put it very succinctly, like, you know, the great example is, I was in the studio once, and there was this thing on this object on the table, and I was an artist of color who said, you know, if I make that, that is somehow going to be about the global South.
Well, I mean, I think Kara Walker
And it was a white cube.
said it in a way that I thought was really interesting in a documentary I somehow stumbled across. She said, if a black woman paints a bunch of smiley faces, someone's going to walk into the room and ask why she's so angry. So it's, you know, I mean, the thing is, in an ideal world, and I think it's really difficult to kind of admit, but I think it's also very important to discuss, is how artists of color, or, you know, do people say that still? People of color?
Yeah, no, yes.
They do.
They do.
They
Sure.
do. They do. Say
No?
No,
Am I big?
They do. I think it depends on where you're talking, what region you're talking
Right.
about.
Yeah.
But the conversation that inherently they have to have with themselves as to how they're going to negotiate these circumstances. I've just taken it on fairly straight on. And I think it's, strangely, given my work, I think it's buoyed the work and given it an opportunity to be kind of really looked at more clearly. And I think some of the things that Bennett brought up around secrecy or coding, right? That those just seem like these layered kind of intrinsic devices inside the work. No one really is attempting to, like, you know, I mean, and if they are, I mean, that's awesome. That's fantastic, you know. I mean, and there are things, and a lot of them are autobiographical, and a lot of them are kind of personal, and they're, you know, from different experiences, you know, as to why I would, you know, use shade butter, as to why, like, you know, more often than not, those are stories that are not necessarily translated into like a monolithic black experience. And I don't think any of my stories necessarily are the stories that I kind of consider to be kind of the underlying kind of narrative in the work, or born of a monolithic black experience. It's very much built and informed through kind of a personal lens and a marriage of, you know, different kind of contradictions. And I think that those contradictions are the thing that really make me interested in making it, as much as, you know, other people may be interested in trying to participate with that decoding or participation with the secrecy or whatever kind of learn scenario comes as a result. I mean, there are often times when people get very excited. They say, this is Black Secret Society, and like, I invented them, I found them, or, you know, people love to fucking learn shit when they look at an artwork.
Yeah, I agree. That's true.
I mean, it is like the thing, it's when you think you're really fucking smart, you feel really fucking special because you figured it out, kind of thing. Or you learned something about it that you didn't expect to know, and you're an insider. And I don't pander to that necessarily. But I witness it as people participate with the work, and I sometimes find that very funny, to be honest. And I'm not laughing at you people.
But I think the secrecy is born out of unfamiliarity. I mean, there is no, kind of, in a way to your point, there is no secret, there is no, but there is knowledge. I mean, there is something for some people.
Yeah, but the thing about this knowledge was that it was constituted as irrelevant. Right? I mean, as irrelevant. So the radicalness of it is like when Sun Ra comes up with a cosmology that says that fundamentally the only way for you to understand his position is that he's from Mars. Right? This is a radical otherness.
Right.
That if you're,
but that comes from